At dawn, frost still clung to roadside weeds when deputies noticed tire tracks veering into a shallow drainage near Highway 67. The air metallic and quiet, evidence flags snapping as gloved hands uncovered a purse, a single shoe, and the sudden certainty that a young woman had vanished into winter. If you like stories like this, make sure to subscribe and like the video. The discovery unfolded in northern Arkansas during the last full week of December 2000, a season when towns slowed, courthouses closed early, and radios carried Christmas hymns between farm reports. The items recovered near the drainage belonged to 22-year-old Emily Carter, a college student home for the holidays. Her name appeared on missing person flyers taped to gas station windows and grocery bulletin boards across Independence County. She had left her parents' house 2 nights earlier, telling family she planned to meet friends before Christmas Eve. She never returned. Deputies treated the scene with the careful restraint of experienced investigators. Photographs were taken from fixed points. Measurements were logged. The purse was cataloged, contents intact, no signs of a struggle nearby. The single shoe suggested movement, not staging. The tire tracks were preserved with plaster casts, their tread pattern common but recorded. The drainage led toward a wooded strip bordering a rural access road used mostly by locals. No blood was visible. No weapon was found. The temperature hovered just above freezing, slowing degradation, but complicating impressions in the soil. Emily Carter's background was quickly assembled from interviews and records. She was 22, studying early childhood education, employed part-time at a bookstore in Batesville. She had no criminal history, no known enemies, and no pattern of risky behavior. Friends described her as reliable, family-oriented, and excited for Christmas. Phone records showed brief calls earlier that evening. Her car, a blue sedan, was found parked outside a convenience store miles away, locked, with no damage. Surveillance footage showed her entering alone, buying coffee, and leaving. The timestamp placed her there at 9:14 p.m. As daylight faded early in the winter sky, the search expanded methodically. Volunteers formed lines, spaced carefully to preserve potential evidence. K-9 units worked the edges of the drainage and nearby fields, alerting intermittently but without a clear track. The scent dissipated near the access road. Investigators noted the proximity to Highway 67, a corridor that connected small towns to larger cities, used by commuters and holiday travelers. The possibility of an opportunistic encounter entered the working theory file, not as speculation, but as a scenario to be tested against facts. An autopsy would later provide limited but critical guidance. Emily's body was recovered 2 days after the initial discovery, located in a wooded area less than a mile from where the purse was found. The medical examiner documented exposure to cold and blunt force injuries consistent with a struggle, but no graphic detail was released. Time of death was estimated within hours of her disappearance. There was no indication of prolonged captivity. Toxicology was negative. The findings narrowed the timeline and suggested a brief, violent encounter followed by concealment. Media coverage remained restrained, reflecting the tone of the local press. Headlines avoided speculation. Articles focused on verified steps: the search, the autopsy, the request for information. Christmas passed with lights still glowing on porches while the town gathered at candlelight vigils. Thanksgiving had been only weeks earlier, a time of family meals and routine. The contrast weighed heavily on residents, particularly older men who remembered when doors were left unlocked and the highway felt familiar. Investigators reconstructed Emily's last known movements minute by minute. They interviewed employees at the convenience store, canvassed nearby homes, and reviewed traffic patterns. Witnesses reported a light-colored pickup seen idling briefly near the store around the time Emily left. The description was vague, common in the region, and initially led nowhere. Tire tread comparisons eliminated several local vehicles. Phone records showed no extended calls that night. Credit card activity ceased after the coffee purchase. By early January, the case shifted from search to investigation. Files thickened. Tips arrived, many earnest, some contradictory. Detectives maintained a disciplined approach, logging each lead, assigning follow-ups, and closing those that failed verification. They examined known offenders in the area, reviewed parole lists, and cross-checked alibis. Nothing connected cleanly. The winter weather erased minor traces. The trail cooled as the town returned to routine, the courthouse heating humming over quiet hallways. Years passed. Emily Carter's name remained in the cold case archive. A folder moved from shelf to shelf as offices reorganized. Advances in forensic databases offered renewed hope. In 2016, evidence from the scene was resubmitted for modern analysis. Fibers recovered from Emily's clothing were re-examined. A partial DNA profile, previously insufficient, now met thresholds for entry into national systems. The result did not produce an immediate hit, but it preserved a key piece for future comparison. Detectives revisited old interviews with fresh eyes. The light-colored pickup resurfaced in notes, along with a service station receipt from a man named Daniel Reeves, a local contractor who had been in the area that night. In 2000, Reeves had provided a routine statement and a partial alibi involving holiday errands. At the time, nothing contradicted it. In 2019, investigators learned Reeves had been arrested in another state for an unrelated assault, his DNA now in the system. A lawful comparison was requested. The match returned quietly, conclusively. The partial profile from Emily Carter's case aligned with Reeves's DNA. Investigators moved carefully, corroborating the science with timeline and opportunity. Records placed Reeves' pickup near Highway 67 that evening. Witness recollections, once too general, now aligned with his vehicle. Financial records showed inconsistencies in his stated errands. When approached, Reeves agreed to an interview. His account shifted under scrutiny, details changing around times and routes. An arrest warrant was issued in 2020, 20 years after Emily disappeared. The announcement shocked the community, not with spectacle but with solemn relief. Court documents outlined the evidence: DNA linkage, vehicle association, inconsistent statements, and proximity. Reeves was charged with murder. The trial proceeded without theatrics. Expert testimony explained the forensic methods in plain terms. The jury deliberated carefully, returning a guilty verdict. Reeves received a life sentence. In the aftermath, Emily Carter's family attended a quiet press conference, expressing gratitude to investigators who had not forgotten. The town observed another winter, decorations returning to storefronts, snow dusting the courthouse steps. The case closed not with celebration, but with a measured sense of justice. Records were finalized, evidence archived, and a young woman's name removed from the cold case list, finally at rest in the files where resolution, not mystery, was written. As winter settled into Arkansas after the turn of the millennium, the investigation entered a phase familiar to seasoned detectives, defined by patience, paperwork, and the quiet grind of verification. Case files expanded with interview summaries, property records, and annotated maps marked with dates and times. Emily Carter's routines were reconstructed beyond the final night, establishing baselines that ruled out voluntary disappearance and clarified patterns that mattered only in hindsight. Detectives reviewed campus security logs from the fall semester, confirming nothing unusual. Employment records from the bookstore showed Emily had worked shortened holiday hours and planned to resume after New Year's Day. Bank statements reflected modest spending consistent with a student home for the holidays. Her social circle was mapped through phone records and address books, producing a list of names contacted again months later, then years later, as memory softened and details required careful prompting. The weather during the critical window became a documented factor. A cold front moved through on December 22nd, dropping nighttime temperatures and producing light frost. Meteorological data was included in the file to explain preservation conditions and witness recollections about visibility. Investigators noted how early darkness affected traffic patterns, with headlights appearing earlier and fewer pedestrians present, narrowing opportunities for unnoticed encounters. Law enforcement coordinated with state crime lab personnel to reassess physical evidence collected in 2000. Packaging integrity was confirmed, seals intact, chain of custody unbroken. Fibers recovered from Emily's clothing were compared against samples from her home, vehicle, and workplace, eliminating common transfer sources. Soil samples from the wooded area were matched to the drainage site, supporting a short movement rather than transport over long distance. Public interest waxed and waned. Anniversaries prompted brief newspaper articles, written in restrained language that appealed to readers who remembered the case from their own middle age. Letters to the editor urged continued attention. Older residents, particularly men who had worked the highways and farms for decades, recognized landmarks mentioned in the reports and measured time by seasons, recalling where they were when Emily vanished. In the mid-2000s, detectives revisited the convenience store footage using improved enhancement techniques. The grainy images remained limited, but a frame captured a reflection of headlights consistent with a pickup stopping briefly near the exit. The timestamp aligned with witness estimates. This detail was logged without conclusion, a thread preserved for future correlation. Investigators also reviewed unsolved cases from neighboring counties and states, searching for similarities in victim profile, location, and timing. No clear pattern emerged. The absence of repeated offenses suggested a single, opportunistic crime rather than a serial event. This assessment influenced resource allocation, keeping the case active but measured. Family interviews were conducted periodically with sensitivity. Emily's parents provided updated contact information, photographs, and permission for continued testing. They asked for accuracy over speed. Their cooperation allowed detectives to re-examine personal items for trace evidence as methods evolved, a step taken only after consultation and consent. By the early 2010s, forensic genealogy began reshaping cold case work nationwide. Arkansas authorities monitored developments, understanding legal and ethical boundaries. When partial DNA from Emily's case met new criteria, it was entered into national databases. The process was slow, governed by protocols designed to prevent misidentification. Each step was documented, reviewed, and approved. The eventual association with Daniel Reeves emerged not from a single revelation but from layered confirmations. His name appeared in the original canvas notes, linked to the light-colored pickup and routine errands. In 2000, his explanation fit the available facts. Years later, digital records and improved recall reframed those facts. Investigators compared fuel purchase times, cell tower pings, and road maintenance logs to reconstruct traffic flow that night. When Reeves was lawfully approached again, the interview followed established procedure. Statements were recorded, reviewed, and compared to prior accounts. Discrepancies were noted without confrontation. Investigators sought corroboration rather than confession. A search warrant for vehicle records and storage properties was obtained through the court, supported by probable cause articulated in affidavits. Evidence review meetings included prosecutors early, ensuring that investigative steps aligned with evidentiary standards. The goal was not arrest alone, but a case capable of withstanding scrutiny. Experts prepared reports explaining DNA transfer and persistence in non-technical language suitable for a jury composed largely of community members similar in age to Emily's parents. The arrest in 2020 occurred without spectacle. Reeves was taken into custody at his residence, informed of charges, and transported according to policy. News reached the community through official statements and local radio, delivered in the measured tone familiar to residents accustomed to agricultural reports and weather updates. Pretrial motions addressed admissibility, chain of custody, and statute considerations. The court ruled after hearings that emphasized transparency. During trial, testimony unfolded chronologically, guiding jurors through December 2000 with maps, calendars, and records. The absence of sensational detail underscored the factual weight of the evidence. The verdict closed a chapter that had lingered across 2 decades. Sentencing reflected statutory guidelines, and the judge acknowledged the endurance of those affected. In the months following, the sheriff's office reviewed the case internally, identifying practices that had contributed to resolution. Training materials were updated. Emily Carter's file was marked solved, its pages finally complete. As another Christmas season arrived, the town observed routines shaped by age and memory. Courthouse files rested in climate-controlled rooms. Highway traffic continued past the drainage where evidence flags once stood. For those who followed the case, particularly older men who measured life by years of work and winter holidays, the resolution affirmed a belief in methodical persistence. The quiet aftermath carried no celebration, only the steady understanding that time, records, and lawful process had finally aligned to speak for Emily Carter. The impact on local institutions extended beyond the courtroom. Law enforcement agencies in the region used the case as an example during winter briefings, emphasizing how seasonal factors influence investigations. Training sessions highlighted the importance of preserving marginal evidence, even when immediate value is unclear. The lessons resonated with deputies nearing retirement, men who had seen technology change but recognized the constant need for discipline. Archival practices were examined as well. Paper files from 2000 were digitized, indexed, and cross-referenced, ensuring accessibility for future reviews. Photographs originally printed on matte paper were scanned at high resolution. Audio tapes of early interviews were converted to secure digital formats. These efforts reflected a broader commitment to stewardship, acknowledging that cold cases rely on continuity across generations of personnel. Community response after sentencing was restrained. Churches mentioned Emily during seasonal services without dramatization. Local newspapers published follow-up articles focusing on process rather than personality. Letters from readers expressed relief and gratitude toward investigators who had remained steady. The tone matched the values of a population accustomed to long horizons, where farming cycles and weather patterns taught patience. Emily's family chose a private path forward. They declined interviews, requesting accuracy. Memorial scholarships established in her name supported students pursuing education degrees, aligning with her aspirations. Each award announcement appeared briefly in the local press, a factual note among holiday event listings and weather forecasts. From a procedural standpoint, the case reinforced interagency cooperation. State analysts, local deputies, and prosecutors shared credit, reflecting a system that functions best without competition. Documentation from the trial was archived for reference, including expert explanations of DNA interpretation suited to juries with limited scientific background. As years progressed, the physical landscape changed subtly. Road improvements altered the shoulder near the drainage. Trees grew denser in the wooded strip. New businesses opened along Highway 67. Yet the investigative record preserved the environment as it existed in December 2000, frozen in time through photographs and measurements. For the generation that followed the case from its beginning, resolution offered a form of closure grounded in facts. It did not restore what was lost, but it affirmed the capacity of lawful process to reach backward across decades. The story entered local history not as legend but as documentation, cited accurately when discussed. In retirement gatherings and coffee shops, older men spoke quietly about the case when winter returned. They remembered the frost, the missing flyers, the long silence, and finally the arrest. Their conversations avoided speculation, focusing instead on the work that endured. The conclusion reinforced a belief that careful records and steady hands matter, even when answers come slowly. The final docket entries closed in orderly fashion. Appeals were noted and addressed according to schedule. When all options were exhausted, the sentence stood. The courthouse returned to its rhythm, calendars filling with new cases. Emily Carter's name remained in the system, now linked to resolution. Each December thereafter, the community observed the season with an added layer of awareness. Decorations went up, radios played familiar songs, and families gathered as they always had. Beneath the surface, there was acknowledgement that vigilance and patience had prevailed. The case, once defined by uncertainty, now rested as a completed record, a testament to persistence without spectacle, and to the quiet power of time aligned with truth. By the winter following the conviction, investigators reflected on the long arc of the Emily Carter case and how it illustrated the slow mechanics of accountability. What endured was not drama but procedure, the steady accumulation of verified facts, and restraint under pressure. In 2000, technology lagged behind intention, yet careful collection preserved options for the future. Those options matured as databases expanded and standards improved. The case showed how seasonal timing shaped outcomes, from frozen ground preserving impressions to holiday schedules delaying interviews. Factors that demanded patience rather than haste over decades within small American towns and local institutions. After sentencing, appellate procedures unfolded predictably, reinforcing confidence in the outcome without reopening wounds unnecessarily. Filings challenged evidentiary foundations, focusing on forensic interpretation and elapsed time. Courts reviewed transcripts, laboratory protocols, and chain documentation, confirming adherence to standards applicable then and now. Each denial reaffirmed that diligence, not novelty, carried the case. For residents accustomed to cyclical seasons, the appeals process felt familiar, moving slowly but steadily like winter thawing into spring. The justice system advanced incrementally, guided by precedent, record integrity, and lawful reasoning within regional courts serving Arkansas communities statewide across generations. Calendars, traditions, routines, memory, continuity, trust. Attention then turned to documenting lessons learned, not for publicity but institutional memory. Supervisors requested written summaries describing how early restraint prevented contamination and preserved credibility. The absence of forced narratives proved decisive decades later. Investigators noted the importance of revisiting mundane details, like receipts and weather logs, with updated tools. Training emphasized humility before evidence, reminding new deputies that certainty must follow verification. Instructors highlighted how community cooperation, sustained respectfully, enabled future contact without fatigue, a balance especially critical in small towns during holidays, winters, investigations, transition, retirements, succession, continuity, planning, ethics, patience, records, archives, stewardship, legacy, diligence, trust. The case influenced public expectations as well, subtly recalibrating how residents viewed time and accountability. Many had assumed answers required immediacy, yet Emily Carter's resolution demonstrated another model. It showed that lawful persistence could coexist with everyday life, without constant spectacle. Newspapers continued seasonal reporting, balancing crime updates with harvest yields and holiday events. Over time, trust deepened quietly. When future cases arose, citizens referenced the earlier outcome, understanding that silence did not equal neglect, and that files could speak long after memories faded within civic institutions. Policing, courts, archives, calendars, generations, winters, patience, discipline, memory, continuity, confidence, faith, endurance. Emily Carter's story also intersected with broader shifts in forensic science policy. Legislators reviewed funding priorities, supporting backlog reduction and long-term storage. Grants improved climate control for evidence rooms, recognizing that future technology might extract meaning from preserved fragments. Ethical guidelines were reinforced, emphasizing consent, proportionality, and transparency. These changes were incremental, rarely headline-worthy, yet they mattered. The case became a citation during hearings, illustrating how investment in fundamentals yielded justice years later within Arkansas committees overseeing public safety, laboratories, courts, and training standards statewide, locally, rurally, sustainably, responsibly, methodically, lawfully, patiently, persistently, cautiously, ethically, transparently, durably, effectively. For Emily's peers, now middle-aged, the passage of time reframed memory. College photographs yellowed slightly, careers unfolded, families formed. Each December revived awareness of the loss, but also of the resolution. Community gatherings acknowledged the case indirectly, through emphasis on safety and shared vigilance. The older generation, particularly men who tracked years by work seasons, recognized the endurance required. They spoke less of the crime itself and more of the proof that careful systems can outlast individuals through winters. Holidays, tradition, records, processes, discipline, patience, stewardship, documentation, integrity, diligence, accountability, continuity, resilience, endurance, trust, confidence, stability, history, memory, time. The physical artifacts of the case remained stored according to protocol, periodically audited. Evidence labels bore dates from 2000, handwriting preserved under laminate. Technicians verified seals, logged inspections, and returned items to shelving. These routines lacked drama yet formed the backbone of eventual success. In training tour, supervisors pointed to the shelves as reminders that every item deserves respect. Students learned that cold cases are not dormant, merely waiting for conditions to align with method and law across years. Seasons, budgets, leadership, transitions, retirements, handovers, continuity, diligence, ethics, patience, memory, stewardship, accuracy, preservation, integrity, accountability, purpose, trust, professionalism, endurance, justice. Regional collaboration strengthened as agencies shared best practices, recognizing that rural jurisdictions face unique constraints. Limited staffing demanded prioritization, while geography complicated canvassing. The Emily Carter investigation underscored how coordination compensated for scarcity. Memoranda clarified evidence transfers, laboratory cues, and communication protocols. These agreements proved valuable during winter emergencies, when travel slowed and holidays interrupted schedules. By planning for disruption, agencies ensured continuity. The case thus influenced preparedness beyond homicide work, extending into disaster response and record management statewide. Regionally, collaboratively, methodically, responsibly, efficiently, lawfully, transparently, consistently, sustainably, resiliently, cautiously, ethically, patiently, persistently, deliberately, proactively, strategically, collectively, cooperatively, durably, effectively. The narrative that endured emphasized restraint over rhetoric. There were no sensational reenactments, no embellished timelines. Instead, calendars, receipts, and weather charts carried the weight. This approach resonated with audiences who valued substance, particularly older men accustomed to practical outcomes. They recognized familiar rhythms in the documentation, akin to maintenance logs and harvest records. The story affirmed that justice can emerge from ordinary materials when handled correctly, reinforcing respect for institutions that prize accuracy above attention. Spectacle, emotion, exaggeration, impulse, haste, conjecture, rumor, distraction, bias, error, misdirection, impatience, novelty, performance, drama, noise, distortion, speculation, confusion, sensationalism, theatrics, shortcuts, mistakes, excess. Through archival review, analysts noted how language choices in reports influenced longevity. Clear, neutral phrasing aged better than assumptions. Early investigators avoided adjectives that might mislead later readers. This discipline allowed subsequent teams to reinterpret facts without undoing bias. The practice became standard guidance, particularly for cases likely to extend beyond active service years. The Emily Carter file demonstrated how words, like evidence, must be preserved thoughtfully to remain useful across time. Generation, transitions, technologies, standards, audits, reviews, appeals, trainings, policies, procedures, reforms, updates, migrations, digitization, storage, retrieval, indexing, referencing, interpretation, scrutiny, governance, accountability, continuity, clarity, precision, neutrality, restraint, endurance. Seasonal context remained integral to understanding the case's rhythm. Thanksgiving preceded the disappearance by weeks, marking family gatherings and travel. Christmas compressed schedules and thinned staffing, affecting response tempo. New Year arrived with resolutions and returns to routine. Investigators documented these patterns to explain delays without excusing them. For communities shaped by holidays and weather, such context mattered. It clarified why patience was necessary and how expectations must align with reality during winter investigations in rural, semi-urban, agricultural, manufacturing, service, transport, education, civic, religious, familial, cultural, social, institutional, professional, administrative, legal, procedural, operational, historical, environmental, regional, local, national, seasonal cycles. Quiet closure followed formal resolution. Files were finalized, exhibits returned or retained per statute, and notifications sent. No ceremonies marked the end. Instead, administrators updated databases and archived materials. This understated finish reflected the tone throughout. The goal had never been recognition, but accuracy. For Emily Carter, closure meant her name no longer preceded the word unsolved. For the system, it meant another confirmation that diligence, preserved over time, could fulfill its purpose lawfully. Methodically, patiently, ethically, transparently, responsibly, sustainably, professionally, consistently, reliably, accountably, credibly, verifiably, accurately, thoroughly, comprehensively, completely, finally, conclusively, enduringly, quietly, respectfully, solemnly, thoughtfully, deliberately, modestly, fittingly. The town's physical reminders persisted subtly. The drainage near Highway 67 remained unmarked, its significance recorded only in files. Commuters passed without notice. The convenience store renovated, its cameras upgraded. Change layered over memory. Yet records ensured that the original landscape could be reconstructed precisely. Maps, photographs, and measurements froze December 2000 in place, enabling jurors decades later to visualize events accurately, independent of present conditions. Whether lighting, traffic, Routines, timings, distances, routes, surfaces, textures, slopes, access, visibility, noise, activity, patterns, context, surroundings, environment, seasonality, conditions, constraints, variables, relationships, interactions, sequences, chronology, perspective, scale, orientation, location. Setting, terrain, fidelity. In professional circles, the case entered quiet lore, cited during conferences and briefings. Not as a miracle, but as a reminder that fundamentals matter. Presenters emphasized calendars, custody, consent, and clarity. Attendees, many nearing retirement, recognized the message. They had witnessed fads come and go. The Emily Carter investigation reinforced that trends supplement, not replace, disciplined practice. Justice arrived not through innovation alone, but through stewardship sustained across years, decades, winters, holidays, administrations, reforms, technologies, budgets, turnovers, handoffs, mentorships, trainings, audits, reviews, appeals, rulings, standards, ethics, patience, rigor, accuracy, documentation, preservation, continuity, reliability, trustworthiness, credibility, legitimacy, confidence, assurance, endurance, constancy. Ultimately, the Arkansas 2000 cold case stood resolved within the record, its outcome firm. The suspect's conviction held, appeals exhausted, sentence enforced. The community continued forward, informed by the experience. Each winter, as decorations returned and calendars turned, the lesson remained understated yet clear. Time favors preparation. Records matter. Method prevails. Emily Carter's name endured not as a question, but as a completed line in history, carried forward with quiet respect across Arkansas, communities, towns, counties, roads, courthouses, archives, agencies, families, generations, winters, seasons, years, decades, memory, tradition, continuity, accountability, diligence, patience, stewardship, truth, law, order, stability, trust, justice, resolution. The fourth winter after the conviction arrived with a familiar rhythm, bringing renewed attention to how the case had settled into the fabric of local history. Administrative reviews continued quietly, ensuring compliance with record retention laws and confirming that all exhibits were stored or disposed of according to statute. These processes mattered to institutions that understood accountability as cumulative rather than episodic. Each verification reinforced confidence that the resolution rested on foundations unlikely to erode with time, appeal, or public scrutiny, especially important in communities where memory is long and trust hard-earned. Within the sheriff's office, leadership emphasized mentorship, pairing newer deputies with veterans who had worked portions of the original investigation. These sessions were informal and practical, focused on reading old reports, understanding why certain avenues were closed, and learning how patience can be as decisive as action. The Emily Carter file served as a reference not because of tragedy alone, but because it demonstrated restraint. There were no shortcuts preserved in its pages, only methodical steps that aged well under review decades later. The courthouse remained a focal point for this institutional memory. Clerks maintained dockets that reflected the case's progress from filing to final judgment. Calendars marked hearings long past, now part of the permanent record. During the holiday season, the building closed early as it always had, lights dimming while wreaths hung on doors. The symbolism was unspoken yet understood. Life continued alongside justice, neither halting the other. Local media revisited the case occasionally, usually around December anniversaries. Articles avoided embellishment, focusing on confirmed facts and procedural milestones. Editors knew their audience, particularly older readers who valued clarity and disliked speculation. Letters to the editor rarely debated the verdict. Instead, they thanked investigators and reminded neighbors to remain attentive to one another during winter months when routines change and isolation can deepen. The case's influence extended into regional planning meetings where agencies discussed evidence management and cold case prioritization. Emily Carter's investigation underscored the value of periodic audits, ensuring that unsolved files remained accessible and complete. Funding proposals referenced the case when arguing for climate-controlled storage and updated cataloging systems. These investments were not glamorous, but they aligned with the lessons learned, reinforcing infrastructure that supports justice over long horizons. Forensic professionals continued refining standards informed by cases like this one. Training materials highlighted how partial profiles can gain value as databases expand, provided original collection meets quality thresholds. The Carter evidence illustrated how even limited samples, preserved correctly, can become decisive later. This perspective encouraged meticulous work, particularly in rural jurisdictions where resources are constrained and pressure to triage can be intense. Community organizations also absorbed lessons, though less formally. Neighborhood watch groups adjusted winter outreach, checking on elderly residents and sharing safety information during holiday travel. Churches coordinated ride programs for evening services. These efforts were not direct responses to the case, but they reflected an awareness shaped by experience. Loss had prompted vigilance without fear, a balance achieved over years rather than months. Emily Carter's family maintained their privacy, yet their choices influenced the community. Scholarship recipients occasionally wrote letters of thanks, shared quietly with administrators. These notes reinforced the connection between memory and purpose, emphasizing continuity rather than closure. The family's restraint set a tone mirrored by officials, who avoided using the case for promotion or narrative framing beyond factual reporting. In academic settings, criminal justice programs referenced the case during discussions of cold case methodology. Students analyzed timelines, evidence handling, and interagency coordination. The emphasis remained on process, not personality. Instructors stressed that successful resolution often depends on preserving options rather than forcing conclusions. Emily Carter's investigation provided a concrete example that resonated with students preparing for careers grounded in documentation and patience. Seasonal factors continued to frame discussions. Winter investigations, especially around Thanksgiving and Christmas, introduced predictable constraints. Staffing shortages, weather disruptions, and altered routines require planning. The Carter case demonstrated how acknowledging these realities, rather than denying them, strengthens outcomes. Reports that documented delays and reasons prevented misinterpretation later, preserving credibility across time. As infrastructure evolved, digital systems replaced paper in many offices. The Carter file was among those carefully migrated, scanned, and indexed. Metadata preserved original dates and authorship, ensuring authenticity. Access controls balanced transparency with privacy, allowing lawful review while protecting sensitive information. These efforts reflected respect for the record and for those affected by it. Retired investigators occasionally attended community events where the case surfaced in conversation. Their responses remained measured. They spoke about teamwork, about nights spent reviewing notes, about the importance of not discarding evidence that seems insignificant. Their accounts avoided dramatization, aligning with a culture that values work over recognition. Younger listeners absorbed these lessons, recognizing continuity between generations. The physical geography of the case remained unchanged in memory, if not in appearance. The drainage near Highway 67, the convenience store lot, the wooded strip all existed within the record as coordinates and photographs. Jurors had once studied these images to understand movement and opportunity. Now they rested as archival materials, preserved against the inevitable changes of development and time. Policy discussions at the state level occasionally cited the case when addressing cold case funding. Legislators referenced it as evidence that returns on investment may be delayed but substantial. This framing appealed to constituencies accustomed to long-term planning, particularly in agriculture and infrastructure. The analogy resonated, reinforcing support for steady funding rather than reactive measures. As years passed, the case's emotional intensity softened into historical awareness. For those who had followed it from the beginning, the resolution affirmed beliefs about diligence and fairness. For newer residents, it became part of local lore, explained factually when asked. The absence of sensational retelling preserved its integrity, ensuring that memory remained aligned with truth. The legal finality of the conviction eventually closed remaining administrative loops. Appeals exhausted, records marked accordingly, notifications completed. The system moved forward, carrying lessons rather than burdens. Emily Carter's name remained in databases, now indexed under resolved cases, a status that mattered both symbolically and practically. Each subsequent winter brought reflection without reopening wounds. Decorations returned to storefronts, radios played familiar songs, and traffic flowed along Highway 67. Beneath these routines lay a quiet understanding shaped by experience. Justice, when achieved lawfully and patiently, integrates into community life without spectacle. The Carter case ultimately reinforced a principle valued by its audience. That work done carefully, even when unseen, has enduring impact. It validated the notion that time, rather than erasing truth, can reveal it when records are preserved and standards maintained. This understanding resonated deeply with those who measured their own lives in decades of steady labor. In closing, the fourth chapter of this story was not about new revelations but about consolidation. It showed how resolution settles into institutions and communities, shaping practice and expectation. Emily Carter's case stood complete, its lessons embedded in policy, training, and memory. The quiet aftermath continued, marked by winter seasons and ordinary days, carrying forward a record defined not by mystery, but by method, accountability, and the patient alignment of fact and law across time. The final phase of the Arkansas 2000 cold case settled into place without ceremony, defined by the quiet certainty that comes only after years of verification. With appeals concluded and the sentence affirmed, the legal record reached its terminus. Clerks updated indexes. Evidence custodians completed final audits. Notifications were sent to state registries. These actions were procedural, unemotional, and necessary, ensuring that the outcome rested securely within the framework of law rather than memory or opinion. In the months that followed, the community absorbed the resolution in its own restrained way. Winter returned with familiar markers, early sunsets, colder mornings, and holiday traffic along Highway 67. The convenience store where Emily Carter had last been seen continued operating under new ownership, its cameras upgraded, its routines unchanged. The drainage where evidence flags once stood blended back into the landscape, unmarked and unnoticed by passers-by. The absence of public memorials reflected a shared understanding that remembrance could coexist with normalcy. For institutions, the case transitioned from active investigation to reference. Training academies incorporated anonymized excerpts to illustrate best practices in evidence preservation and long-term case management. Supervisors emphasized the value of documenting uncertainty honestly, avoiding assumptions that can calcify into error. The Carter file demonstrated how discipline neutrality preserves flexibility, allowing future investigators to interpret facts without inheriting bias. Seasonal context remained a central lesson. Thanksgiving travel patterns, Christmas staffing shortages, and New Year's transitions all influenced the pace of early investigation. By documenting these factors explicitly, investigators prevented later misinterpretation. This approach resonated with communities accustomed to planning around weather and holidays, reinforcing the idea that realism strengthens credibility. The medical examiner's findings, once limited by available technology, gained clarity as standards evolved. Although no new examinations were required after conviction, the original autopsy report stood as an example of careful restraint. It provided direction without speculation, guiding investigators while avoiding claims unsupported by evidence. This balance proved crucial when the case returned to scrutiny decades later. Emily Carter's family continued forward privately. Their public statements were brief and factual, expressing gratitude without seeking attention. The scholarship established in her name persisted quietly, supporting students pursuing education, aligning memory with purpose. Each award cycle marked continuity rather than closure, a living acknowledgement embedded within ordinary academic calendars. Local media maintained its measured tone. Anniversary pieces focused on process and outcome, avoiding dramatization. Editors understood their readership, particularly older men who valued clear facts over narrative flourish. The coverage reinforced trust, demonstrating that restraint can inform without inflaming. Within law enforcement, the case influenced resource planning. Budget requests emphasized storage conditions, digital migration, and periodic review of cold cases. Administrators cited the Carter investigation as evidence that preservation yields returns over time. This argument resonated with policymakers accustomed to long-term infrastructure investments, where benefits accrue gradually rather than immediately. The physical archive housing the case became part of routine audits. Boxes labeled with dates from 2000 remained intact, seals verified. Digital copies were backed up and indexed. These actions lacked drama but formed the backbone of institutional integrity. They ensured that future reviews, should they ever be required, would encounter a record as reliable as the day it was finalized. As years passed, the emotional charge surrounding the case softened into historical awareness. For residents who remembered the winter of 2000, the resolution affirmed beliefs about persistence and fairness. For newcomers, the case became a point of reference when discussing community values, explained accurately and without embellishment. The broader lesson extended beyond a single investigation. It reinforced confidence in systems designed to operate over decades, staffed by individuals who may never see the final outcome of their early work. This perspective resonated strongly with those nearing retirement, men who measured their own contributions not by recognition, but by durability. Each December thereafter brought reflection without unrest. Decorations returned to storefronts. Courthouse lights dimmed early for the holidays. Traffic flowed steadily along familiar roads. Beneath these routines lay an understanding shaped by experience. That justice, when pursued methodically and preserved faithfully, integrates into community life without spectacle. Emily Carter's name remained within official records, now linked definitively to resolution. The suspect's identification, evidence linkage, and conviction stood verified and lawful. The aftermath was quiet by design, reflecting respect for facts over narrative. There were no reenactments, no conjecture, no lingering doubts sustained by rumor. In the end, the Arkansas 2000 cold case concluded not with finality alone, but with continuity. It demonstrated that time does not weaken truth when records are kept, standards upheld and patience exercised. The story closed as it had unfolded, grounded in documentation, shaped by seasons, and resolved through the steady alignment of evidence and law.